We are about to get started with the second half of our morning session, and I am extremely pleased to have the honor of introducing Walter Hood as our first keynote speaker today. Walter Hood, I met Walter quite a few years ago when he was the fellow at the Smithsonian, and his work has inspired me ever since I saw some of what he had done with connecting landscape architecture, artist practice, design, and community engagement. I think before I ever met Walter, I had read an article, I'm going to embarrass you, where he was described as a community whisperer. I don't know if that phrase translates well into Spanish, but I think it's incredibly meaningful that Walter has developed ways, perhaps it's intuitive, perhaps it's through practice, of engaging with communities to connect artistic practice with landscape design in the projects that he does. So without further ado, I present to you Walter Hood.
Can everyone hear me? Bravo. It's a pleasure to be in Buenos Aires. It's the first time here. The weather, the architecture, the people are beautiful. I've only been asleep, so I haven't been seeing the city, so hopefully this all comes true. I have about a half an hour to talk about place, and it's really difficult to do this in a short period of time because places are very intense and varied. But one of the things that we like to think about is every time we go to a place, we have to get to know the place, and we have to get to know the people, we get to know the ecology, the history, and it forces you to be different. I'd like to share with you 6 different museums that over the last decade, my practice have had the privilege to actually design landscapes around 6 what I think are important institutions in the U.S. The first one I'd like to talk about, place through commemorating identity. This is the new International African American Museum, not to be confused with the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. that Phil will talk about tomorrow. But this is one that's in Charleston, South Carolina. This museum is on a real site. It's on a site where archaeologists and historians think that 40% of the North American African diaspora landed here and were enslaved here on this wharf called Gastons Wharf. We have the history, and we know that this place is real. This is a real place where there was a pier, a wharf, one of the largest in North America, and a warehouse where the slaves were taken from Sullivan's Island in and stored here and sold. One memory that someone told me that the food chain of the sharks actually changed during this period of time because of the bodies that were thrown over the side of the wharf. This is the site today. It's as if nothing happened here. And this is typical in America. We like to erase. There is no palimpsest in America. When I travel to other places in the world, they deal with culture because they have different origin stories. But we've tried to really bring back the stories that we can talk about in the Low Country through looking at other ideas, but also concepts of landscape and concepts of culture. And more particularly, the landscape of the Low Country. Charleston, South Carolina is in the swamps. It's pretty much an area that's wet. And it became very important in America because of rice. And the settlers, the white settlers, English had rice, but they didn't know how to farm the rice. When the slaves came, the slaves knew how to do the rice, and before you knew it, you had a billion-dollar industry, and it became one of the richest states in the Union. Here on the right-hand side, when I was in landscape architecture, that's Middleton Plantation. Today, they call it Middleton Place. Plantation is completely wiped out. This was created by the hands of black people. You also see the Brooks map here, which is the first engravings of the crossing of the Middle Passage, and some of the other landscapes here. We were asked to design a memorial and a landscape for this new museum. And this is the ground plane. The building, I am not going to show the building. The building is one long bar that sits up maybe 6 meters above, so the landscape is open. I'd like to think of the landscape as a colonial English garden thought through an African sort of memory. So literally transforming an English garden into something very strange and something hopefully very wild. The idea is that you would move through this landscape. It's open 24 hours a day. It's part of the public space of Charleston, and you would find different things in the landscape. You will find different qualities: light, texture, air, epiphytes, things that grow in the air because the air is very thick. And from this, culture actually happened. And these are sweetgrass baskets that are actually made by the local people. We have the history line of where the wharf was and where the warehouse was located. And we're trying to pull this out through different materials: stainless steel to make the light shine. Also wood. To talk about the wharf, we don't want to celebrate Gaston, the guy who made the wharf, but we want to celebrate the place. And so the material coming from the bottom of the ocean is called tabby. We take the shales from the bottom of the ocean, the Atlantic, and make the ground plane. And then at night, it's a public space. You move around and you find these different experiences within the garden. And some of these experiences have more to do with being able to see all the way through, or come face to face with small children who were highly needed during the slave trade, and you walk through the warehouse and you see yourself and the children together. And then we're making a giant fountain that's reminiscent of the Atlantic Ocean. And the ocean is down maybe 2.5 meters, so we raise it up 2.5 meters and make it wide. And then in the fountain, we're casting bodies, full scale, from the Brooks map in the fountain. And as the water rises and falls, the puddles will make the bodies. And there will be many bodies so that you cross over as a metaphor to the Atlantic Passage. And this landscape is really meant, as Toni Morrison said, there is no place in North America for someone of African descent to go and sit and talk with your ancestors. So this is really an ancestors' garden, a place where people can come and either be together or be alone and think about where they are from and who they are connected with. And the landscape is a very strange landscape, but it's made of those products in a way that forces you to think about people of color and the place in a very different way. This is scheduled to open in 2.5 years. This next project is called Breaking the Box, and I'm going to the other coast now. This is in Oakland, California. This is the Oakland Museum, which was designed by landscape architect Dan Kiley, Kevin Roach. It won many awards in 1968. It was the year that Huey, the Black Panthers, were in Oakland, and it was supposed to be a free museum, but instead they had to close it because Huey Newton was being prosecuted right across the street, and they could not create a free museum because Oakland was in turmoil. The civil rights movement was just coming to a climax, and so this free museum became a paid museum over time. It was 3 museums put together: culture, fine arts, and history. And we were hired in the last couple of years to break the box. It was made in the 60s, so late 60s, so it was brutalist. If you know the architecture, I guess urban was not good, right? Everyone was inside and no one was outside, right? And so working with the museum, the Golden State Warriors won the basketball championship 2 years ago. The museum is where the green is, so you cannot see the museum. But 50,000 people came out on the other side of the museum. Inside the museum, you are hermetically closed. So there's no way to relate to the city. And so we've been working with them to break the box. And so how do you dismantle the box to allow the people to come in? And we've worked with them to think about everything from the vegetation to thinking about how people can see out as well as see in. But every aspect of the museum, inside and outside, we've worked with them to break the box, to break the perception that the city does not exist on the other side. And one of the main things that we've come to sort of understand is that once we break the box, we can actually see the city in a different way. That the walls come down and the museum has to open. And museums have issues where they don't like to have multiple openings because they have to staff them. And so we told them, if you take your cafe from the inside and place it on the outside, people will come to your cafe because Oakland now is a food place. All the young people, the demographic has changed, and food is the #1 thing. And so this is from the new porch of the new cafe looking out over the lake, and this will be the new entryway. And so you'll come from the city, all of a sudden you will see a new restaurant. Down in the corner you see it's completely closed, and we will have a completely new open place. We asked them to design a children's garden on the other side where the children can come and stay all day, and they will have a new sign on the other side. And from the inside, it will be a giant terrarium with plants growing. This is the south side, so you can bring your children here during the day, and they can stay all day. And then a wayfinding system when you get lost to help you find your way. This is very radical for this museum because this museum was owned by the city. And it was taken from the city by a fellowship of donors 4 or 5 years ago, and now they're beginning to do things very different as far as energy and also different events. This is an event my students did 2 weeks ago where we made orange juice and invited people to come and make orange juice. And then we made a fruit veil around a tree, which this is relating to many of the deaths that had been happening in the neighborhood next to it. And so it was a way for the community and the museum to open themselves up and to have a dialogue. Gardens in a wild landscape. Golden Gate Park in San Francisco is a park from the late 19th century. It was not designed by a landscape architect, it was designed by a park ranger, which means that it's very wild. It's not like Central Park. People live here in the woods. There are myths of people living here. This was a giant sand dune in the late 19th century. We cut the hills down of San Francisco, took the dirt out there, and then planted trees. So it's a fiction. But most people think it's a wild landscape. 10 years ago, I had a chance to work on the Herzog and de Meuron new museum here, and we added 2 new public gardens. The gardens were paid for by citizens of the city who gave the museum $5 million. This is really important because public spaces no longer collectively would we say, let's spend $5 million on public space. We look for private investors now. So the public realm, these new institutions are becoming our new public squares. We've been open 10 years now, and last year we had the second highest attendance here to MoMA in New York. I think it was 2.1 million people visited this museum. It's a museum where you don't have to pay. The front part of the museum is free. So all of this is free. You have a theater, you have a restaurant, you have a gallery area where you have parties, and the museum is on the backside. So most people can spend their day in the museum in 2 gardens and the concourse without paying money. And if you live nearby, this is a place for your children to grow up, but it's a place, it's your garden, it's your museum. A lot of it for us is the archaeology. These palm trees were given to the museum in 1895. Some came from Chile, and some came from the Canary Islands. Most of the planting here was donated to the city from Australia and other countries that were growing at the time. And this is the story we wanted to tell as we look at the Japanese tea garden, but the gardens are a vessel in time to talk about the culture over time. The sand that I talked about, we used the ground to actually talk about the sand, and Helen, the paving. I was in Trafalgar Square, and I love the paving so much in Trafalgar Square that we brought it to the DeYoung Museum. And then Andy Goldsworthy played with the same stone and made a beautiful piece. This is called Crack Line. The inside, we catch all of the water to drain back into the aquifer. And this is a place where the seasons and mystery actually happen in these 2 small gardens. But the views of the city, for the first time, you can see things in a completely different way in this new institution. And the children and the older people find a place that they can actually use. This is the children's garden on one side, and then we have a more classical garden on the other side. This is the more formal side. And on this side, you eat, you get married, you come and look at art. The other side, the children, they just run and run and run. It turned out that weddings are the #1 concessions for this side of the garden. And on Friday nights, it's free. This happened after 2 years museum being open, and they saw that their demographic had changed from an older demographic to a younger one. So every Friday there's DJs and there's free sort of partying. This next museum, standing on a moraine. I was telling someone at lunch today I had never been to Jackson, Wyoming, and never designed a wildlife museum. Right? When someone asked me to design a museum for wildlife, I was thinking, so are they real or are they fake? And of course they're fake, right? The wildlife. It's like that, right? So this is a bugling moose. So every year the moose come to the moraine and they lose the antlers and they make this crazy noise. I can't make it, but it's part of their mating. And this museum sits up above. It was designed by a famous architect. I won't mention his name. But the problem that they had was people would come to the museum, come to Jackson, and pass by the museum. Here's the Highway 26. If the airport is here, you would get in your car and drive by. The museum looks like a ruin, a Scottish ruin. So it looks like it's deserted. So they put a moose down here, and people stopped the car, take the picture, get in, and kept driving. So what we did was, we said, well, maybe we can change the sociology. So we pushed the parking all the way back, and we made a terrace along here so that you could actually see people at the top of the hill. This is the new view. There are no cars. All the cars are behind you. You can actually now see the moose. There is the Snake River that comes through. And this is what people do there now. So to go from the car to this, and this is very important because in a landscape like this, when you see a car, it changes everything. When you see a person, it changes everything because it's scale, right? And when Helen talked about getting rid of the cars in cities and making cities for people, we're so used to seeing cars. Once the cars go away and you see people, it changes everything. And in the wild, it changes everything. And for us, this is an Ai Weiwei Zodiac piece. The terrace was really a place to get artists and people to be in this landscape, where before they were never in the landscape psychologically. And now they have parties, they have 10K races, they are in the landscape. And they can walk down and see marmots, and they can also see art. This is fake wildlife. Yeah? But more importantly, the people who work here, the terrace is 1/4 of a mile long. So every day they can walk back and forth to get 1 kilometer. So for them to live in Jackson and to have this is very, very important. And then at night, this is my favorite photograph. In the winter, it becomes part of the landscape. And so the moose can come up and the people go away. And in the summer, the people come back. And so there's this landscape that's part of the wild, but it's also part of that culture. Sampling Central Park. In New York, we know Central Park is one of our oldest parks, but it's also next to Fifth Avenue and next to one of our older museums. This is the Cooper Hewitt Museum, the Smithsonian. We were asked to take a Carnegie Mansion garden and help them transform it as part of their latest renovations. And this was more historic, having to deal with the federal government and the history. And so again, like all of the projects, we started with a story, And the story was this landscape architect, Schimmerhorn, made a garden that was never complete. And what was complete was a very bad garden, and we wanted to make it good again. And the government could not argue with that, right? So they said you could do it. And my larger idea was the reservoir sits here, Fifth Avenue sits here, and the garden is here, and I wanted to make this part of Central Park. Because on a winter day, you can stand here and be part of this garden and vice versa. And they're right across the street from each other. And the influences of the rockery and the garden come from the east. And this idea to make this new place over 2 years, and then sampling all the vegetation from across the street. So the rhododendrons, everything on the one side, we just brought across the street to this very small garden. And as we started to dig, we found the rock from the island to make the rockery. And then last fall, we opened. And the museum now, again, 7 days a week, people can come and be in the garden. This is a design museum. The lawn has been there the whole time. There's different events that happen on the lawn. You're now looking back towards Central Park is here. And now we have 1,000-acre garden. There's a new restaurant. And this summer was the first summer that they had the events, and they planned every square inch of the garden, from ping pong to badminton to dance to music. But this has become their #1 venue. And lastly, appropriately, we'll write a new fiction. This is the Broad Museum in Los Angeles. And like all the other places I talked about, whether they were wild, whether they were on a moraine, or whether they were in a wetland or a swamp, the Broad is in Los Angeles, right? And Los Angeles has its own ecology. Its ecology here on Bunker Hill is one of freeways and one of tunnels. We were asked to design a garden next to Diller Scafidio's Broad Museum, which is here. Frank Gehry's museum is over here. This was a road. Our client built a freeway on top to put a restaurant and a garden. This freeway, the cars go underneath, the garden sits up here. So we basically turned the freeway upside down and then put dirt, right, so to grow trees. And then on the sidewalks, we didn't have dirt beneath, so we built the dirt above. And then we opened last, I guess in the spring. And here you have the view of the garden and the restaurant and the museum. What makes this garden very different is what it's made of. And this fiction that we wanted to create was as if the garden was here before the building, right? And so we were able to do that by buying olive trees that are 120 years old, right? And so we take the old olives and put it next to this big new machine building. And what you get is a very strange, precarious landscape. One fiction that you try to understand, where am I? You're in Los Angeles, yeah? And for us, this is a very interesting way, again, to not be critical of culture, but to allow culture to guide how you think about place. There are no orange chairs here. There is no fantastic fountain. There is no colorful paving. It's very simple. It's trees and dirt all together. And through this combination, what we try to get people to sort of understand is this fragile ecology that we live in. And particularly in Los Angeles, there's no water, right? And to think about having water when there's no water, but to be on a landscape that's just as powerful as the building. You don't need that much. The building has a single aesthetic. The landscape does not need 10 different aesthetics. It needs something very simple that people can relate to. And from the ground plane to the canopy, it's now a place, I think, where people come in LA to be calm, because the city is, and it's just a place to be calm. And this is very strange fiction for a place like Los Angeles. Thank you very much.